Today, I want to focus on one of the strongest statements of faith found anywhere in the Bible. It is recorded in Hebrews chapter 6. It is impossible for God to lie. Think about the power of those words. The Bible does not merely say that God chooses not to lie, it says that it is impossible for him to lie. Lying is completely contrary to his nature, his character, and his holiness. People may disappoint us. Governments change. Human promises can be broken. Even our own emotions can change from one day to the next. But God does not change, and his purpose cannot fail. Hebrews chapter 6 explains that our confidence rests upon two immutable or unchangeable things. First, God gave his promise. Second, God confirmed that promise with his oath. God's promise and God's oath are the two unchangeable things upon which our faith can rest. In the immediate context of Hebrews chapter 6, the writer points us back to Abraham. God promised Abraham that he would bless him and multiply his offspring. But because there was no one greater than God by whom he could swear, God swore by himself. In other words, God placed his own name, character, and reputation behind his promise. God did not give Abraham his oath because God's word was uncertain. God's word alone was already completely trustworthy. He added an oath because he wanted those who would inherit the promise to understand that his purpose could never change. God was saying, in effect, my identity stands behind my promise. For my promise to fail, I would have to stop being God, and that can never happen. Abraham then waited patiently and received what God had promised. This teaches us an important lesson. Waiting does not mean that God has forgotten. A delay in fulfillment is not the same as a failure of his promise. God may allow time to pass, but time cannot weaken his word. This same confidence helps us understand the purpose God announced at the beginning of human history. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 records God's blessing and commission to the first human couple. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. God placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, a paradise filled with life, beauty, peace, abundance, and perfect fellowship with their Creator. He blessed them and told them to multiply and fill the earth. This was more than simply an instruction to have children. It revealed God's purpose for the human family and for the earth. As the human family multiplied, they were to care for the earth under God's loving authority. The conditions associated with Eden were not meant to remain confined to one small garden. God's purpose pointed toward an earth filled with righteous people, reflecting his image and enjoying the blessings of his rule. The whole earth was to become what Eden represented, a beautiful home filled with life, peace, harmony, and people living in fellowship with God. Sin interrupted that assignment, but it did not force God to abandon his purpose. Adam and Eve's rebellion introduced sin and death into human experience. They lost their perfect life and were removed from the garden. But human disobedience did not make God powerless, nor did it cause his original purpose to disappear. God knew exactly how he would bring his purpose to completion. As Isaiah chapter 55 teaches, God's word will accomplish what he desires and succeed in the purpose for which he sends it. God does not announce a purpose and then hope that circumstances cooperate. When God declares what he intends to accomplish, no human rebellion, no spiritual enemy, and no passage of time can prevent its ultimate fulfillment. Hebrews chapter 6 gives us two powerful foundations for faith. First, God's promise is unchangeable. When God speaks, his word is true. He does not make careless promises. He does not discover information later that causes him to reconsider. He does not lack the wisdom, authority, or power to carry out what he has declared. God understood the beginning, the end, and everything in between when he announced his purpose. His promise did not depend upon human perfection. Its fulfillment depends upon God's own faithfulness. Second, God's oath is unchangeable. God confirmed his promise with an oath. An oath settles a matter. It provides a guarantee that what has been promised will be fulfilled. Since no one is greater than God, he swore by himself. Therefore, his oath is backed by the highest authority in existence, God himself. These are the two immutable things, God's promise and God's oath. And Hebrews tells us that it is impossible for God to lie concerning either one. That means our faith is not based upon wishful thinking. It is not based upon positive emotions or human speculation. Our faith rests upon the perfect character of a God who cannot lie. Some may look at the suffering, violence, sickness, injustice, and death in the world and ask, how could the earth ever become a paradise? But faith does not judge God's purpose only by what can be seen today. Abraham also faced circumstances that appeared impossible. He and Sarah were beyond the normal age of having a child. From a human standpoint, the promise appeared impossible. Yet Abraham continued to trust God. Why? Because the fulfillment of the promise did not depend upon Abraham's natural ability. It depended upon God's power and faithfulness. The same principle applies to God's purpose for the earth. When we look at the earth today, we see the consequences of human independence from God. But when God looks at the earth, he also sees the completed purpose he has declared. He sees the human family restored. He sees righteousness and peace. He sees suffering brought to an end. He sees the earth filled with people who love him and reflect his qualities. He sees his purpose accomplished because nothing can cause his word to fail. The Bible story begins with paradise and the tree of life in Genesis. It ends with the restoration of life, healing, and God dwelling with humanity in Revelation. The Bible is therefore not the story of God abandoning his original purpose. It is the story of God carrying that purpose through to completion despite human sin. Hebrews chapter 6 also describes our hope as an anchor for the soul, both sure and firm. An anchor keeps a ship from being carried away by powerful currents. In the same way, the promises of God keep our faith from being carried away by fear, doubt, disappointment, or the conditions we see around us. Our hope is anchored in something greater than ourselves. Jesus entered into God's presence as our forerunner and high priest. Through Jesus, God provided the means to reverse the damage caused by sin and death. The sacrifice of Christ was not God abandoning his purpose for humanity. It was the central means by which he would fulfill it. Jesus came to rescue, restore, and reconcile humanity to God. Through him, God's promise of life and restoration becomes certain. That is why Christian hope is not merely the belief that things might improve. It is confidence that God will complete what he has promised because Jesus has already opened the way. Hebrews chapter 6 encourages us to imitate those who inherit the promises through faith and patience. Faith and patience must work together. Faith says, God has promised. Patience says, I will continue trusting him until I see the fulfillment. We should never interpret waiting as evidence that God has changed his mind. We must never allow temporary circumstances to speak more loudly than God's eternal word. When fear tells us that God has forgotten, we answer, it is impossible for God to lie. When the world appears hopeless, we answer, God's promise and his oath cannot change. When our own circumstances become difficult, we answer, my hope is an anchor for my soul. And when people suggest that God's purpose for the earth has failed, we remember his command and blessing in Genesis, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. God's original purpose was for the earth to be filled with a human family living under his loving authority. Sin created a temporary interruption, but it did not produce a permanent defeat. God finishes what he begins. Hebrews chapter 6 gives us an unshakable reason for hope. God made a promise. God confirmed it with an oath. These are the two immutable things, and it is impossible for God to lie. Therefore, we can be certain that God will fulfill every part of his declared purpose. The earth will not always be filled with suffering, injustice, sickness, and death. God's purpose announced in Genesis will reach its fulfillment. His will shall be done on earth. The human family will experience the life, peace, and harmony represented by the Garden of Eden. Our faith does not rest upon what the world looks like today. It rests upon who God has always been. He is truthful, He is faithful, He is unchanging, He is all-powerful, and He cannot lie. So let us hold tightly to the hope set before us. Let that hope become an anchor for our souls, sure, firm, and immovable. God's promise cannot fail. God's oath cannot change. God's purpose will be fulfilled. And because it is impossible for God to lie, we can place our complete faith in every word He has spoken. Follow me on truthquest.us.